Welcome, my friends. Today I'm going to narrate some conspiracy theories to help you fall asleep. But first, please like and subscribe to the channel. Also, comment down below where you're watching from. Thanks. Everyone says I was inside the chamber for 3 minutes, but there I lived long enough to forget who I was. And when I came out, I remembered everything. They told me it would be routine, just a diagnostic sweep of the temporal chamber at Lab 9A, nothing more. I'd been at the Quantum Mechanics Research Directorate for 4 years, mostly running simulations and correcting overflow errors. Time dilation was still theoretical to most of the world, but in our basement-level bunker outside Langley, we tested it daily. The chamber had been acting up for weeks. Anomalous readings, clocks drifting out of sync by fractions of a second. Nothing that triggered alerts, but enough to leave postgrads muttering in the break room. That morning felt no different. I drank bad coffee, skipped breakfast, scanned my badge, and entered the vault. The chamber door hissed closed behind me. That's when the lights flickered. Not a power surge, something else. The red line on my retinal clock froze at 07:48:22. I tapped my wrist interface, but the screen wouldn't respond. Then I heard it, a static hum, rising in pitch, steady and awful, like a tuning fork buried in my skull. I turned to leave, but the chamber door wouldn't open. I stood there blinking, confused, as the walls began to breathe.
No, that's not right. The room didn't change shape, but my perception of it did. Angles twisted, corners folded into themselves. My mind held on to the idea that I was standing in a 10 by 10 foot cube, but visually it had become a sphere, expanding and contracting like a lung.
The last thing I remember before the first reset was my voice. I screamed, but it came out slow, warped, like dragging a vowel through molasses. Then, nothing. Just black. And when I woke up, I was right back at the entry console, red line blinking, 07:48:22, like the past minute had never happened. Except I remembered all of it. I thought it was a glitch in the system. I thought I'd imagined it, until it happened again, and again, and again. I didn't tell anyone, not at first. Part
of me thought it would stop if I ignored it, like a loop correcting itself.
But it didn't. Every time I entered the chamber, the cycle repeated. I started testing it, changing clothes, placing small objects, adjusting my timing. Everything snapped back after 3 minutes, everything except me. I retained every memory. I began documenting what I could in a notebook I locked in my desk. At first, it was just fragments, timestamps, sensations, attempts to alter the loop. But over time, I noticed patterns. A flicker in the wall panel that arrived a second earlier. A subtle temperature shift. I wasn't just repeating the same moment. Something was adapting, maybe the chamber, maybe me. I realized I could anticipate certain events, even act ahead of them by milliseconds. It scared me. I began logging system diagnostics before and after each run. The output looked identical until I compared the files byte for byte. 2 values changed every time, always in the same spot. They didn't correspond to any known system parameter. It was raw data. I cross-referenced internal docs, nothing. Eventually I converted the data into ASCII characters just to see. It looked like nonsense, symbols and static. But a structure began to emerge, not in the content but in the spacing. They weren't just symbols, they were coordinates, temporal ones, The loop was embedding its signature in the system logs. Every reset carried a fingerprint of when, and maybe who, it was affecting. When I checked the mainframe logs for my session history, there was nothing. No entry, no runtime, just silence. I wasn't just looping, I was being erased. The deeper I looked, the less sense any of it made, and the more I began to feel like I was never meant to find these things. The coordinates didn't line up with test cycles or maintenance logs. But when I mapped them, a strange sequence formed, not a loop, but a drift forward, each one further than the last, like time wasn't repeating, but stacking. I started digging through old experiments related to perception and memory drift. Some files were sealed, but others had been misfiled or half-redacted. That's when I found the BRACE protocol, behavioral response to accelerated cognitive environments, a discontinued study from the late 90s. Their test subjects reported identical visual hallucinations during timed isolation, even though they were separated. One report detailed synthetic memory layering, experiences implanted not by suggestion, but by exposure to looping stimuli. The standout was Subject 12. He was said to exhibit fluency in a non-human symbol system after repeated exposure. When I compared those symbols to my own logs, the match was exact. The same characters, same spatial rhythm. Subject 12 had been transferred to something called Osiris Black. No files, no personnel trail. Just that one phrase, status unresolved. I hadn't slept in days. I barely left the lab. My world had narrowed to the reset loop, the byte shifts, and now, who else might have gone through it? I wasn't chasing a malfunction anymore. I was chasing an intent. Site Delta wasn't listed on any internal map, but it was buried inside metadata from a corrupted BRACE document, coordinates hidden in an image file's header. I claimed a transport vehicle under false pretense, filled out the forms by hand to avoid digital tracking, and drove south. The road ended at a chain-link fence, weather-worn and unlocked. The building ahead was sunken into the hillside, windows black. Out. No guards, no cameras, just a faded warning sign. I moved through each floor slowly. The structure was stripped, cleared of files and hardware, but on the lowest sub-level something had been left behind. A chair bolted to the floor, a curved frame around it, empty now but wired to the ceiling. A small placard on the wall read, Osiris Black, Vestibule 1, Entry. Time is not guaranteed to align with exit. My breath caught. On the far wall, dozens of symbols were drawn in thick, black marker, repeating patterns, my patterns. I found a drawer filled with microtapes labeled Session Drift, S12. I took a few, resealed the drawer, and left. The building felt wrong, like it was holding a memory of what had been done there. I drove back in silence, unsure if I'd discovered the beginning of something or the middle of something I couldn't stop. I waited until the network was quiet before I played the tapes. The first showed a man, mid-30s, wired to biometric gear, seated in that same chair. No audio. He barely moved at first. Then 20 minutes in, his image began to flicker, frame skipping, duplicating. By the end, he looked older, sharper. His body hadn't changed, but his face had. The next tape showed the same man again, years later, same room, No visible transition. I captured stills and saved them to an encrypted drive. I didn't tell anyone inside the facility. Instead, I contacted Mira, a former systems engineer now working under the radar at a private contractor. She owed me. I sent her a few samples and asked a simple question. Do you see what I see? Hours passed. Then a reply. Someone opened this before you. That night, my apartment door was cracked open. Nothing missing, just touched. I started noticing things, keycard delays, odd behavior from co-workers, conversations that paused when I entered the room. I tried to confront my supervisor. He looked through me, not at me. When I asked about the system logs, he smiled and said, "Access is looped. You should know that." I walked out and didn't go back. I returned to the chamber one final time. The hum was gone. The flicker, the distortion, gone. The retinal clock moved normally. I stayed for nearly 30 minutes. Nothing happened. I should have felt relief, but instead I felt hollow. When I checked the logs afterward, the 2 altered bytes were still there. Exactly the same. I decoded them again. This time, it wasn't a symbol, it was code. A recursive function designed to retain memory across resets. A loop, not a malfunction, but a test. I printed it and met Mira at a diner off the interstate. She read it in silence, then said, "It's not about the machine. It's about you. They're not trying to break time. They're trying to break you into something else." She said Osiris Black was rolled into a larger project now. Codename, Perennial, designed to build memory-stable cognition outside machine.
Environments, they were using people, training minds to survive repetition, to evolve past it. I asked what came next. She looked at me and said, "They'll want to know how long you can last." That's when I knew. The loop hadn't ended, it had just widened. I drove for hours after that, no destination, just motion. But it didn't matter. I could feel the pattern now stretching behind me. I live without a name now, no ID, no fixed address.
I move between towns, pay in cash, sleep in motels with paper-thin walls and humming lights. I don't talk to people unless I have to. The 3-minute loop is gone, but something else remains. A kind of awareness. Time feels different now. Not slower, just layered. I dream in symbols. I don't forget things. I recover from illness in half the time. I see patterns in behavior, subtle repetitions that most people mistake for routine. But I see the shape beneath it. Sometimes I pass strangers who seem to hesitate, like they
Almost recognize me. Sometimes I wonder if they're watching. Maybe others made it out too. Mira once told me the human brain was never meant to experience repetition without consequence. She was right. Every loop leaves a mark. I'm not there.
man who walked into that chamber. I don't think that man exists anymore. He was a prototype. What remains now is something else. I move through the world unnoticed, but not unintentional. I intervene when I can, small corrections, quiet disruptions. I leave no trail, just fewer mistakes, fewer loops. But sometimes, in the quiet, I hear it again, that faint hum, low and
steady, just beneath the noise, and when I do, I stop, breathe, and wonder, not with fear, but with clarity. if somewhere beyond the loop, someone is still watching, still recording, waiting to see what I become next.
It started with dreams. Not the usual kind where you're flying or falling. These were detailed, structured, vivid, in ways that didn't feel like sleep. At first, I didn't think much of them. I chalked it up to stress or too much screen time before bed. But by the third night, I was waking up with sketches already forming in my head, machines mostly. Ones I couldn't name or understand, drawn with precision I didn't know I had. I'd never been much for engineering, barely passed geometry last year. But something about the angles and joints made sense, like I was remembering, not inventing. I started keeping a notebook under my bed. At night, I'd dream. In the morning, I'd draw. Pages filled up quickly, pistons without engines, coils nested like Russian dolls, towers with no visible power source. None of it meant anything to me, but there was a strange consistency across the pages. No matter how scattered the dreams felt, the designs always picked up where the last one left off. That's when it stopped feeling random. I didn't tell anyone. Not my dad, who wouldn't get it, or my physics teacher, who probably would, but would want to see the notebook. I didn't even tell Cassie, and I told her everything. It felt private. Not sacred, just fragile. Like talking about it too soon would break whatever connection I was tapping into. And then came the buzzing. Not loud, but low and persistent, like an old radio signal trying to reach me through static. It happened every time I opened the notebook, almost like the paper itself was vibrating. I'd press my palm against the page and swear I could feel it humming beneath the surface. By the end of the second week, I stopped questioning whether something weird was going on. I just didn't know what to do with it. And when I flipped back through the pages one night and saw a symbol tucked into the corner of a drawing, an overlapping triangle and coil, I finally looked it up. That was the first time I saw his name. Nikola Tesla. The internet didn't help much at first. Searching for the symbol pulled up fan pages, conspiracy forums, and a bunch of blurry graphics that looked like they were designed in the 90s. But I kept digging. One night I found an old post buried in a closed message board archive. Someone had uploaded a photograph of a notebook page, not scanned, not typed, just a raw image with that same triangle and coil in the corner. The caption read, "Found in an estate box labelled Tesla, 1943. That was the year he died. I saved the image to my phone and kept reading. The post was from someone with the username Inductive Ghost, and it was the only thing they ever uploaded. No replies, no profile, nothing else. But it wasn't the image that kept me up that night. It was the machine in the drawing. The lines weren't. Just similar to mine. They were nearly identical. Same spiral form, same awkward armature extending off one side. I held my sketch next to it and stared. I'd never seen this image before. No way I could have copied it, and yet there it was, like a mirror drawn on different paper. I didn't sleep. I tried to trace the username. Most of the leads were dead. Old links, broken sites, servers long gone. But one thread on a forgotten physics subreddit mentioned something called the Tesla Lineage Notebook, A user claimed it had passed through private collectors since the 70s, surfacing once during an estate sale in upstate New York. No one knew where it was now. The details were vague, but one line stood out. The sleep designs begin in adolescence. That stopped me cold. I hadn't told anyone, and here was an old post describing exactly what I was experiencing. It wasn't just the machines, it was the dreams, the symbols, the compulsion to understand. That night I realized I wasn't the first. And if that was true, someone out there might already know where it all leads. I didn't talk to anyone for a few days. It wasn't fear. It was disorientation. School felt hollow. I'd sit through class without hearing anything, my mind caught between what I'd drawn and what I'd found. I started spending time at the library, not expecting answers, but because no one bothered you there. In the local history room, behind a dusty microfilm machine, I scanned regional newspapers from the 1940s. Page after page blurred until I found a short article from 1943. A reclusive foreign inventor had died alone in a Manhattan hotel room. No name, just age believed to be 86. It said, federal agents removed all personal effects within hours, citing national security. The language felt rushed, too neat. I cross-checked the date. It matched Tesla's death exactly. Then I found a memo from the Office of Alien Property, a real wartime intelligence program, describing the seizure of technical schematics and devices unsuitable for public review. No inventory, just a stamp. Reviewed and sealed. That word stuck with me, sealed, like something buried. The more I read, the more patterns emerged. Sketches attributed to Tesla that mirrored mine. Curved coils, repeating spirals, mirrored annotations. And every time I found one, the dreams returned stronger. In one, I saw a room lined with copper wiring, a machine humming in the center like it was waiting. I woke up shaking, Tesla's name still echoing in my mind. This wasn't just history anymore. It felt aimed at me. There's an old workshop outside town that people ignore. It sits behind a crumbling brick wall near the riverbend. My grandfather once pointed to it while we were fishing and said that place belonged to someone who saw the world differently. He never explained, but after everything I'd learned, it was the only place I could think to go. It had been abandoned for years. The back gate gave way with a push. Inside, the air was stale, the scent of dust and metal thick. Shelves lined the walls, mostly empty, though a few held glass jars filled with rusted parts. Light filtered in through broken roof slats, striping the floor with shifting beams. In the corner, under a canvas tarp, I found a bench. Covered in yellowed paper, small copper coils, ceramic fragments. Some of the designs were mine. Others felt like future versions of machines I haven't dreamed of yet. I picked up a page, dated March 11, 1982. Years before I was born. In the margins, the same mirrored script. Above the bench, tucked between tins, was a black leather journal. The handwriting was tighter, more deliberate. It belonged to a boy named Eli. He wrote about dreams, the humming, the urgency to build. The symptoms matched mine exactly. The final entry read, I found the core design, I'm not the first, and I won't be the last. That night, Sitting on the cold floor with someone else's words in my hands, I understood. This wasn't about Tesla alone. It was about everyone who'd unknowingly inherited his unfinished work. I thought silence would protect me, that if I kept the journal hidden, the connection would fade, but it didn't. One morning, my laptop refused to boot. Then my school computer froze when I searched for Tesla lineage. Calls started coming. No
Voice, just static. Always 17 seconds long. Then I saw the sedan. Same spot, 3 days, straight. Same man in sunglasses. I quit using my phone.
I stopped logging in, but it was too late. One night I came home and found my notebook slightly out of place, just enough to know someone had opened it. That was the line. I packed everything, my sketches, Eli's journal, a flash drive, and went to Cassie. She didn't speak for a long time. She just looked through the pages. "This isn't just history," she said. "It's alive." She helped me back it all up. Encrypted folders, Tor uploads, distributed files across multiple cloud services. 2 hours later, it was all gone. Every backup was wiped. No trace. It stopped feeling like research. It became a warning. I thought about walking away, destroying everything, but the dreams wouldn't let go. They kept coming, sharper, louder. Like the machines weren't just inside me anymore, they were waiting to be built. And now, someone else knew it too. 3 nights later, I heard footsteps in the hall. I wasn't asleep. The door clicked open. Someone stood just inside, unmoving. I stayed still. After a minute, they left. When I opened my eyes, Eli's journal was gone. I didn't tell anyone. I left before sunrise. Cassie met me at a gas station. No questions asked. We drove for hours until she handed me a folded paper. A professor. Her uncle had once worked with her on something unofficial. The address led to a storage unit near a decommissioned factory. Inside it was cold and silent. She was in her 60s, ink-stained fingers, hair pulled back. She didn't seem surprised to see me. I laid out what I had. She studied it all in silence. Then she said, "You're not building a machine, you're finishing a message." I stared at her, confused. She explained that Tesla's final work wasn't about energy, it was memory, encoded through frequency. The designs weren't inventions, they were transmissions, split across time, embedded in dreamers. "You're a carrier," she said, "one of many." I asked, "Carrier of what?" She said, "Proof of something the world was never supposed to see." Behind her, an old monitor flickered on, displaying a diagram I recognized instantly. Mine, but older, archived. "How long have you been tracking this?" I asked. "Longer than you've been alive," she replied. "And now they know you've seen too much." Outside, a car pulled up, then another. Cassie turned toward the door, but the professor raised her hand. "They won't come in yet. They're waiting to see what you'll do." In that moment, I knew this wasn't a pattern, it was a legacy, and it had reached its turning point. I haven't been home since. Cassie was left alone. Maybe they thought she didn't understand. Maybe she didn't. The professor's unit was scrubbed clean. No files, no fingerprints, not even dust. I learned to move, to disappear. I use cache, I stay offline. But I still see the patterns in window reflections, in static, in how shadows fall. The dreams are less frequent, but deeper. Not machines now, but sequences, a language that feels like remembering. Once, I wrote non-stop for hours in a motel. When I came to, my hands were shaking and the pages were filled with something I couldn't read, but knew. I burned it. The urge to build still stirs sometimes like a pressure just under the surface. But I don't build anymore. I watch, I listen, I wait. There are others. I've seen them. A man with the symbol tattooed on his wrist. A child humming the same tone. A woman tracing a shape into fogged glass. Some of them know. Most don't. Maybe they never will. Maybe they're just holding their part of the message. All I know is it's still broadcasting. Whatever Tesla left behind wasn't a machine. It was a seed, and it's still growing, hidden in notebooks, in daydreams, passed down like a dormant frequency. I live quietly now under different names in borrowed rooms. I won't talk about it anymore. But at night, when the hum begins and the old shapes return, I press my palm to the page and whisper the one thing I know is true. It was never mine to begin with. They said free energy was a myth, but it's been running silently on Mars for decades, powering a secret base we were never meant to know existed. I met Dr. Alan Kessler in a room without windows, the kind reserved for projects nobody supposed to talk about. He wasn't what I expected. A quiet man with nervous energy and the distracted air of someone who'd lived inside his own head too long. They brought me in because of my logistics background, not physics. My job was simple: secure movement, sensitive materials. But from the start, something felt off. The materials were oddly light, no radiation shielding, no cryogenics. Just a sealed matte black cube the size of a cooler that didn't register on standard scanners. Kessler treated it like a sacred object, always watching it when it moved, always tracking it himself. On paper, he was working on a new kind of capacitor for naval power systems. In reality, he was building something called a dynamic energy core, a self-contained generator that didn't need a power source. At first, I assumed it was classified junk science, the kind that burns up defense budgets without producing anything useful. But then came the test. They ran it in a sealed chamber under Site 9, a decommissioned missile silo we'd gutted for Black Project testing. No power input, no external lines, just the cube, a small bank of sensors, and a closed-loop monitor. The readings were clean, perfect, stable output, constant wattage, zero deviation. Kessler didn't celebrate. He looked scared. Said nothing. Just stared at the monitor like he'd made a deal he couldn't walk back from. 2 days later, he was gone. His badge stopped working. His files were scrubbed. Officially, he resigned and relocated overseas. Unofficially, nobody knew where he'd gone, or nobody who would say that should have been the end of it. But last week I got a couriered envelope with no return address. Inside was a flash drive and a note in Kessler's
Handwriting. 2 words, still running.
The flash drive was old, plastic casing cracked along one edge, label peeled. No markings, no metadata, just a single folder named ZP Logs. I waited until I was alone in the storage sub-office, killed the wireless signal, and loaded the contents onto an isolated terminal. Inside were 37 video clips and a plain text file. The videos were rough, grainy surveillance footage mostly, some showing the test chamber from Site 9, others from locations I didn't recognize. What stood out were the timestamps. They were current, as in from the past week, which didn't.
Makes sense. That facility had been mothballed, its access points sealed, equipment stripped.
I double-checked against the internal logs. Site 9 hadn't recorded a single entry in over 18 months. But there, in the footage, was the cube, still mounted in its containment brace, still emitting a soft, pulsing blue light. Same hum, same stability. No power input. And the log file, ZP Core, README, read like a diary. Short, clipped entries in Kessler's tone. Most were time-stamped with only a date and a line or two, output nominal, temperature flat, interference patterns unchanged. But one entry stood out. Dated 3 days before the drive arrived, it read, "Protocol extended, crosslink confirmed, Mars relay stable, they never shut it down." I read it 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Mars? A relay? Protocol? My first instinct was to dismiss it as Kessler unraveling, some paranoid tangent. But the phrasing, the precision, didn't feel like the ramblings of a broken mind. It felt calculated. I isolated one of the more recent videos and scrubbed through the background, frame by frame. At the 18-minute mark, a figure appeared, white suit, helmeted, moving with purpose, not military, not anything I recognized. In the top right corner, a blinking diagnostic tag read, Habitat 4, Sol 2710. I leaned back in my chair, pulse steady but cold. Sol, not day, not timestamp. Sol Martian time. That wasn't paranoia. That was confirmation. I spent the next 48 hours digging through classified systems, retracing old internal requests, audit logs, anything tied to Site 9 or Kessler's access history. Most trails led to dead ends, files retracted, permissions revoked, or citations scrubbed. Under blanket national security directives, but one data requisition stood out. 7 months before he vanished, Kessler requested archival material from a dormant division within the Department of Aerospace Logistics, a forgotten Cold War agency that had managed experimental orbital platforms. The request was tagged 0. Point prototype feasibility. Routed to a private defense contractor I'd only heard whispers about, Marion Bell Systems. According to a declassified budget report from 1998, Marion Bell had received nearly $1.2 billion to develop a remote, autonomous deployment framework for lunar testing environments. Only the term lunar was a misdirection. Hidden in the footnotes was a mission directive labeled Hermes A4. It contained telemetry packets in a format I recognized from my previous project at Langley. One particular batch, when decoded, listed a power flux pattern identical to the output, curve of the 0-point cube, same amplitude, same harmonic intervals. Only this data wasn't theoretical. It came from a live feed logged 23 years ago. It wasn't from the moon. The signal's bounce delay down to the nanosecond aligned with a Martian relay arc. This wasn't just a proof of concept. It had been deployed. Hidden in the raw logs was another term, Tantalus base. No, Official listing existed under that name, but a handful of support tickets filed under Marion Bell's internal IT system made indirect references, requests for bandwidth prioritization, to a deep field array node outside lunar orbit. One requisition mentioned atmospheric compensation calibration, which made no sense unless it was intended for a body with a thin atmosphere, like Mars. My gut told me I'd found what Kessler wanted someone to see. But it wasn't the technology that haunted me. It was the implication that this thing, the core, wasn't just still running. It had been powering something the entire time, something buried in plain sight, something operational. And the worst part, no one was supposed to know it existed. Tantalus Base wasn't in any database, but the name stuck with me. I found it again, barely, on a decommissioned logistics manifest buried in the archives of a private aerospace museum outside Huntsville. I told them I was doing historical research on early planetary research initiatives. The curator, an older man with a military background and a cautious tone, gave me access to a locked cabinet of flight-era microfilm backups. Most were junk, shipping logs, personnel rotations, training rosters. But one reel caught my attention. It was labeled in grease pencil, TB, Non-Terrestrial Ops. The film was old, cracked in spots, but when I ran it through the scanner, there it was. Shipment tags addressed to Tantalus Base, dated 2002 to 2004, with cargo entries listed as Core Stabilization Unit, Composite Shielding Array, and something that made my throat tighten. Sustained Bioatmospheric Deployment Package. That's not how you label equipment unless something or someone is expected to live there. Later that night, I drove out to what used to be a Marion Bell testing range, 2 hours east of Vicksburg. The facility was shuttered a decade ago, after an internal fire destroyed most of the east wing. But I wasn't interested in the public buildings. I was looking for what lay beneath. An old contractor who owed me a favor gave me the original schematics before the fire, before the cover story. There was a sub-level sealed and never reclassified marked protocol housing. I found the hatch under a collapsed access stairwell, rusted, bolted, and cold to the touch, but still intact. It took me 4 hours to pry it open with hand tools and silence every alarm loop tied to the emergency power system. Inside, the air was dry and stale. Lights flickered overhead, still drawing current from a backup generator nobody had thought to disable. The corridor led to a lab, or what was left of one. Shattered glass, scorched panels, and a wall of scorched terminal banks, still half lit, displaying one phrase on a loop: core signal nominal, transmission active. I stood there staring at the charred wreckage and felt it deep in my chest. This wasn't a failed project. This was a handoff. Earth was never meant to keep it. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, not entirely, but because of the feeling that I was already being watched. Not the vague paranoia that creeps in after too many hours alone with dark thoughts, but the kind that makes you check reflections, count footsteps, and listen for static where there shouldn't be any. I stayed offline, used a burner laptop to copy only the most essential files, diagnostics logs, signal snapshots, Kessler's journal, and prepared a secure package for dead drop delivery. I still had one contact I trusted, a defense contractor named Marla, who once worked with DARPA's exotic energy team before quietly retiring after a closed-door hearing. We'd exchanged favors before, but this would be different. I didn't explain what I had, only that it involved something she once called the Holy Grail of suppression science, an energy system that outputs more than it consumes. Her response was one line: "If it's 0 point, don't send it. Bring it." I drove 8 hours overnight to a storage facility we'd used once in Atlanta. Nondescript, off the books, cash rental. I didn't notice the black SUV until I pulled in. Tinted windows, idling engine, no plates. I passed it slowly, heart steady, pretended I was just there for old inventory, but I knew. I parked and walked inside, but the signal hit before I reached the unit. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. No name, just coordinates and a message. No more warnings. That wasn't random. Someone had broken through my compartmentalization protocols. That meant access to internal clearance logs. That meant this wasn't just surveillance. It was containment. I left the phone on a pallet and walked out the back. I switched vehicles twice that day, stayed off highways, used cash, changed clothes at a roadside motel. I didn't make it to Marla. The last message I got from her was a photo, an image of the cube active in a facility I didn't recognize. Her caption said, "They're already using it, but not here." I knew what she meant. Earth was the prototype. The real installation was off-world, and the longer I stayed quiet, the more useful I became to them. The coordinates from the text led to an observatory outside Magdalena, New Mexico, long abandoned, tucked behind a ridge like a forgotten relic from another era. I arrived just after dusk, armed with nothing but a thermal scope, 2 burner drives, and the lingering hope that someone still on the inside hadn't turned. The place was dead quiet, no lights, no vehicles, no sign of recent maintenance, but the door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old electronics. Shelves of equipment were covered in tarps. I moved slowly, scanning for motion, but found only silence until I reached the control room. The monitors were on, flickering softly with data feeds too advanced for what this station should have handled. Someone had reactivated the uplink, and from what I could see, it wasn't pointing anywhere near Earth. One display cycled through compressed telemetry logs from a remote system labeled TB1. Another showed a live heat map, dated in sols. And then there was the feed. Low-res, infrared, slightly distorted but unmistakable. A structure, angular, matte black, partially buried in red sand, with 6 smaller domes surrounding a central tower. The cube sat in the middle, glowing faintly. I watched as figures in suits moved methodically between stations. Not scientists, not astronauts, personnel. The kind trained for containment, not discovery. And behind them a flag, not ours. No insignia I recognized, just a dark triangle over a white field. At that moment I understood. Kessler hadn't vanished. He'd been relocated. His resignation was a cover for extraction. The technology hadn't been hidden. It had been transferred. Earth was never the deployment zone. It was the testing ground. Everything since, the scrubbed records, the sealed labs, the surveillance, it wasn't to suppress the science. It was to manage the timeline, control when and how the public would be allowed to know. I backed away from the feed, heart pounding, the weight of it sinking in. Free energy wasn't suppressed because it threatened oil or politics. It was hidden because it had already built a colony. and the people funding it didn't want Earth to know it was no longer the center of human civilization. It's been 12 days since I left the observatory, and I haven't slept more than an hour at a time since. Every safe house I used was burned. Every alias I've ever created is flagged. I've seen myself in files I didn't write, under clearances I never had. They're not just watching anymore, they're rewriting the past to erase me from it. I've kept moving west to east, crossing state lines at odd hours, avoiding any routine. I dumped the last drive into an old journalist's mailbox in Baltimore, someone who's already lost enough not to be easily scared. I didn't include my name, just a folder marked TB1ZP Core Hermes Relay. Maybe they'll bury it. Maybe they'll leak it. Doesn't matter now, because what keeps me awake isn't the fear of being caught. It's the realization that they never needed to suppress the truth. They just had to delay it. By the time anyone connects the dots, by the time these files reach someone who still believes in accountability, it won't matter. The infrastructure is already in place. The colony isn't a theory, it's operational. The cube wasn't a breakthrough, it was a doorway. We always thought free energy would save us. We never asked why it wasn't offered, not once, because the truth is, we weren't supposed to inherit it. We were the last test, an entire planet of simulations to see how long control could be maintained without transparency. And now that control has moved elsewhere. When I think about Kessler, I wonder if he knew from the start, or if the realization came too late, like it did for me.
Either way, he made his choice. I've made mine. This message, if you're hearing it, is the last piece I'll ever record. After this, there's nothing left to hide and nowhere left to run. Maybe you'll believe me. Maybe not, but someday,
when the stars over your head look different than they used to, you'll know. We were never meant to stay here. We were only ever meant to keep the lights on until they left. It started on a Tuesday. I remember that clearly because Tuesdays were my reset days. No meetings, no noise, just the sound of rainfall tapping on my apartment's rusted tin awning. I lived on the 6th floor of a building that should have been condemned years ago, but the view made up for the peeling paint and flickering hallway lights. From up there, the skyline looked like a slow-moving machine, steel and steam, especially on overcast mornings like this one. I was sipping instant coffee and scrolling through my usual 3 news apps, one mainstream, one fringe, one just to feel something, when something caught my eye. The rain wasn't grey, it shimmered, not poetically, not metaphorically, it shimmered for real, like sunlight fractured through a cracked prism. I assumed it was oil on the glass until I stepped onto the fire escape. The air felt warmer than it should have, and the droplets glowed faintly with streaks of sapphire. Barely visible, but real. It was subtle enough to question your own perception, but too strange to ignore. I stood there for 10 minutes, just watching. No one below reacted. Umbrellas up, heads down, business as usual. But something inside me shifted. Not a thought, more like a sensation. It's quiet, not peace, more like sedation, a stillness that didn't feel earned. Then, without understanding why, I smiled, not from joy. It felt automatic, like I'd been prompted. That's when I grabbed my phone and started filming, not to convince anyone, but to give myself proof that what I was seeing was real. By the time the sky cleared, I had 3 short clips, a cracked lens, and a feeling I couldn't shake. The videos didn't do it justice. Grainy, flat, but slowed. Frame by frame, the shimmer was there. I spent the afternoon reviewing the footage over and over, then uploaded it to a private drive. I wasn't ready to go public. Instead, I posted a vague question on a weather forum I used to follow. Anyone else notice colour refractions in today's rain over Midtown? A reply came an hour later. The user had no name, no post history, just the handle G0proof. They wrote, "Check archived No-A radar from 1140 to 12:10. Layer composite. Don't filter." That was it. No flare, no sign-off. Just a breadcrumb. I followed it. Pulled public radar logs, stacked the raw images and removed the default filters. What emerged was a pulse. Not a storm pattern, something deliberate. A spatial frequency moving cleanly west to east, low and controlled. Too precise to be natural. I cross-checked against the last 6 months, nothing similar. Not until I dug back decades. One match, February 3rd, 1991. The files mentioned a strange fog over the city, 20 minutes long. 23 people were hospitalized. Symptoms are vague. The incident had been filed under atmospheric instability, but the signal pattern matched exactly. When I tried to pull deeper records, I hit empty links. Not corrupted, removed, intentionally. I refreshed the forum. G0proof was gone, account deleted, no IP, no trace. Another ripple in a rainstorm that hadn't really passed. Sleep didn't come that night. I moved from tab to tab, chasing threads, but the information wasn't pouring in, it was missing. That's what stood out. Scientific papers with dead links. Weather logs that stopped mid-page. Models that had notes, but no explanations. It wasn't noisy. It was absent. I found a screen-capped excerpt from a deleted abstract, dated 2009. Project Saffron Line, a controlled emotional modulation trial seeded through regional precipitation systems. It read like bad science fiction, but something about it rang true. I searched the name again and found it buried in an old Department of Energy slide deck from 1983. The image was nearly unreadable, but the phrase was there. Phase 3 trial. Locations: Albuquerque, Providence, Midtown, Sector Best. Outcomes: mood softening, inhibition disruption, increased suggestibility. No author, no agency, just a strange triangular logo, 3 circles intersecting. I traced hospital reports in those cities. Each had a subtle spike in behavioral disturbances within 72 hours of anomalous rain events. Nothing that made headlines. Just enough to echo. Then came a 1992 article from a now defunct Science Digest. A retired engineer, Victor Engel, claimed he'd worked on a NOAA program involving liquid phase frequency propagation. He called rain a delivery medium for sub-audible emotional calibration. His piece was pulled within weeks, labelled a hoax. 3 months later, he was found dead, ruled a suicide, no note, no family, cited. His address? Midtown Sector B, same as
mine. That wasn't a coincidence, it was a pattern. One someone had gone to great lengths to erase.
The phrase saffron line led me to a half-forgotten place, an abandoned municipal field station near the old reservoir off Harlow Avenue. Locals called it the sheds. It had been sealed since the 80s, but early that morning I climbed through. A breach in the fence. I expected nothing. Instead, I found time standing still. Inside the main structure was a preserved operations room. Dials, monitors, dust-covered schematics. Maps still hung on the wall, crisscrossed with curves and red pins. It didn't look raided. It looked paused. In the back, I pried open a swollen filing cabinet. Most drawers were empty, but one box remained, labelled Rain Index Protocols, 1981. Inside were microfilm reels, data logs, and a leather-bound notebook. Handwritten, orderly, clinical. The notes described rainfall trials using chromatic resonance elements to influence mood and behavior in public populations. Color-coded dispersal models. Time of day impact studies. The language was flat, detached, but what it described was stunning. The initials VE appeared throughout. Victor Engel had worked here. The final entry, dated April 5th, 1983, read, Phase 3 operational. Emotional dampening within target parameters. Recommend continuation under civilian conditions. I stood in that crumbling room, holding the record of something massive, and realized I hadn't stumbled on a theory. I had stepped into a machine still quietly running. I kept it quiet. Scanned the files. Duplicated everything. Stored it on isolated drives. I thought I'd wait, verify more, connect more. But this kind of knowledge doesn't rest. It agitates. By morning I was drafting an email. Then the signals started going dark. First my Wi-Fi, then my phone. The router blinks green like nothing was wrong, but nothing connected except the old offline laptop. I packed a bag, paid cash, checked. Into a motel under a borrowed name. That night I noticed a black sedan across the lot, parked, silent, no plates. It stayed there for hours. I watched through the blinds until sleep overtook me. By morning it was gone, but I knew it had never left. I tried to send the files again. VPN, new account, encrypted upload. I hit send. The screen froze, then blacked out. When it came back, the drive was blank. No traces, no logs, as if I'd never touched it. That was the shift. I wasn't just uncovering something anymore. I was being watched. And the people behind this, they weren't going to wait another
40 years to stop me. I don't remember falling asleep, only waking up.
The motel room was quiet, lit only by the red blink of the smoke alarm. My bag was gone. So were the drives, but sitting on the nightstand was a cassette tape in a clear plastic case. No label, no explanation. I walked to a corner store and bought the cheapest tape player they had. I sat in my car and listened. A low pulse filled the headphones, rhythmic, soft, layered with faint, shifting tones. I couldn't explain it, but it made me heavy. My limbs, my chest, my thoughts. Then a voice, synthetic and calm. Trial sequence complete. Subject response, compliant. Proceed with phase continuation. I pulled the tape, shoved it in the glove box. But something in me stayed altered. My thoughts echoed back strangely, like they weren't entirely mine. Back in the room, I found a typed note slid under the door. All caps. One line, there is no weather. That's when it all made sense. The rain wasn't a vessel, it was the signal, the medium, the carrier. It wasn't hiding the message, it was the message, controlled, structured, tuning us day by day while we walked beneath it, blind. I had never been an outsider to this. I'd always been a participant, part of the study, the control group. And as I looked out and saw a new storm begin to fall, I realized I had already been rewritten. It's been 13 days since the last rainfall, and the quiet now feels louder than thunder. The shimmer hasn't returned, but I no longer trust what I see. I've changed locations twice. No phone, no laptop, no network. Just notebooks and paper. Everything is analog. I know.
I won't expose this the way I thought.
The files are gone. The evidence scattered. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that I remember, and that someone else might too. I've become something I wasn't before, more alert, less at peace. I watch how people behave when it
rains, how they sink without meaning to, how their expressions soften.
I keep notes now, just for myself. Each morning, before the city wakes, I walk. I listen to the silence beneath the traffic. I scan the clouds. I remember the tones on that cassette. And sometimes I wonder if the pulse is still playing. If it ever stopped. Maybe it's playing through me now. That's what lingers. Not fear, but certainty. I've been rewritten. And the worst part is I can't tell what parts were mine to begin with. I never thought much about sound. It was just background, radio static, birds outside the window, the dull hum of appliances. But that changed the day I found my grandfather's box of tuning forks in the attic. I was cleaning out his house after the funeral. He was the kind of man who labelled everything. Cords, jars, even empty boxes. But this wooden case was unmarked. It was wrapped in canvas that smelled like old oil and tucked behind a broken speaker. Inside, nestled in worn felt, were tuning forks engraved with odd frequencies. 174 Hz, 285 Hz, 963 Hz. Numbers that meant nothing to me then. I struck one gently and held it up. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through my skin like it had weight. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I felt a strange warmth in my chest, like the echo of something almost remembered. The next morning, I searched his workbench for notes or diagrams. Nothing, just old tools and a radio tuned to static. I brought the forks home and left them on the kitchen table. Then the dreams started. I was lying in a white room, bathed in a soft tone, not music, more like a presence. I felt calm, not just relaxed, clear, whole. I woke up feeling sharper, more grounded. I wasn't sick, but I felt better. That night I played the 528 Hz fork. The sound settled into the walls like it belonged there. Even my skittish cat curled up next to it and purred. That's when I knew this wasn't just metal and vibration. Something in these frequencies was working on me, and I had no idea how much trouble that would bring. It started with a search, just curiosity. I typed tuning, fork frequencies into a browser and found the usual wellness sites, chakra talk, sound therapy, vague claims. But deeper down I found archived scans, lab memos from the late 80s. One from a now defunct facility in New Mexico mentioned controlled harmonic stimulation and cellular vibration experiments. Frequencies listed 174 Hz to 963. Has he an exact match? That's when I felt the first chill. This wasn't blog-level pseudoscience. Someone had researched these frequencies in a lab, and the results were buried. I started a journal. Each night I'd strike a fork and sit quietly. Over time, I noticed patterns: better sleep, clearer thoughts, an old wrist injury stopped aching. The changes were subtle, like my body was realigning itself. But then things got weird. One night, after using the 396 Hz fork, my phone rebooted and reset to 1971. My Wi-Fi cut out. Bluetooth stopped working. I tried again days later, same thing. Devices failed around certain tones. I recorded the sounds on my laptop. The files corrupted. I sent one to a friend in audio engineering. He messaged back saying it triggered a noise gate anomaly he'd never seen. Then he ghosted me. No reply, gone. That's when suspicion took root. These sounds were interacting with technology, and not in a way it was designed to handle. Maybe someone had designed our tech to filter them out. I started digging deeper. Old patents, obscure research, declassified files, anything that hinted at acoustic science. One name kept surfacing: Dr. L. Heisman. In 1983, he published a paper on low-frequency sound and tissue regeneration, pulled from circulation 2 years later. A summary had been archived. Non-invasive acoustic entrainment shows marked cellular reorganization at harmonic nodes of 528 Hz and 417 Hz. It hit me. These weren't just relaxing tones. They were causing cells to reorganize, function more efficiently. Heisman worked for a Shell Institute backed by a biotech firm that, coincidentally, held dozens of patents for digital audio suppression software. I compared early and current firmware builds. Sure enough, modern devices were programmed to mute non-standard waveforms. These forks weren't off-key. They were tuned to something the digital world had learned to ignore. I switched to analog, an old tape recorder. The tones played clean. I listened for an hour. When I opened my eyes, everything looked sharper. Not metaphorically, literally clearer. That night, the dream changed. I saw a sterile room. A man sat on the floor, holding a fork I didn't recognize. It vibrated without contact. He looked up and said, "We buried the rest for your safety." When I woke, I knew I wasn't just chasing tech. I was following something that had been erased.
On purpose. The dream stayed with me longer than it should have.
The man, the fork, humming without motion, it felt less like a memory and more like a suggestion, a prompt. I searched local records for sound research, closed labs, anything tied to acoustic studies. That's when I found Eden Wave Laboratories. Just a line item in a land use transfer from 1992. No photos, no public record. The coordinates pointed to a decommissioned building about an hour outside the city. I drove out early the next morning. The place was half swallowed by trees. The sign out front had rusted beyond recognition. The gate was chained but sagging. I climbed the fence and stepped into silence. The inside was stripped. No furniture, no power, just dust and long hallways. But something about the acoustics felt off. My footsteps echoed strangely. My breath sounded softer than it should have. In the central chamber, I noticed a circle of tiles, slightly different from the rest. Newer, wrong colour. Hollow underneath. I pried one up and found a steel box, latched and sealed. Inside were devices shaped like tuning forks, but more refined, smoother,
heavier and marked with unfamiliar frequencies.
One bore a symbol, 3 concentric rings crossed by a line. I'd seen it before in Heisman's research diagrams. Next to the instruments were handwritten notes. Cellular resonance mapping, one line read. And beneath it, repeated, unauthorized, frequencies bypass tissue barriers. My chest tightened. This wasn't fringe science. It had been active, buried. I picked up one of the devices and felt a soft ringing in my ears, high, constant. When I stepped outside the building, it stopped. Inside it resumed. The air in that place was holding something, like it remembered what had happened there. I repacked the box and took it with me. I knew I shouldn't have. But curiosity had given way to responsibility. Someone had erased this place, and now I had unerased it. For days I didn't touch the devices. I kept them sealed in foil, locked in a drawer. But I could feel them. Not literally, but the awareness of them never left. Small glitches started happening. Emails unsent themselves. My laptop booted in diagnostic mode. A white sedan started appearing nearby. No plates, same car, different streets. I tried to rationalize it, but deep down I knew I wasn't imagining the attention. I decided to share what I'd found with Lena, a friend from college. She worked in acoustic analysis for a telecom firm. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I told her I had analog tech disrupting modern hardware, she said to meet after hours. I brought one device and a copy of the notes. Her lab had a sound isolation chamber, no cameras, just padded walls and analog meters. When I struck the fork, the readouts dipped, then spiked, then flatlined. Lena stared. There's modulation. Under the pitch, she said. Something hidden, subharmonic, layered. It's like a second signal riding beneath. She asked if she could keep the fork overnight for deeper analysis. I hesitated, but I agreed. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. No message. Just a photo of my apartment. The next day, Lena stopped replying. When I went to the lab, I was told she had taken indefinite leave due to a family emergency. No notice, no goodbye, just gone. That was the moment the illusion broke. I wasn't investigating anymore. I was being watched, and the closer I got to the truth, the fewer people I could trust. I didn't sleep the night Lena vanished. I sat on the floor beside the Eden Wave box, the forks laid out like surgical tools. I wasn't afraid, just empty. I took the deepest one, the unlabeled fork, and struck it against the desk. The tone was low, almost inaudible, but it hummed. Through my bones, I leaned closer and heard it, a voice buried in the vibration. Not English, but rhythmic, intentional. I recorded it with an old reel-to-reel, played it in reverse. The cadence was perfect, like a language designed not for sound, but for resonance. I found a skipped note in the Eden Wave papers. Biological systems interpret signal as instruction. Do not exceed 60 seconds. I'd exposed myself for 5 minutes.
That explained the pressure behind my eyes, the metallic taste, the ringing.
I stumbled to the mirror. My pupils were fully dilated. Faint lines had appeared beneath the skin on my neck, like waveforms. That's when I understood. These weren't healing tones, they were commands, frequencies as code. I collapsed and woke hours later. Blood dried under my nose. The clock blinked. 3:33 a.m. Everything digital in the apartment had reset. Not just shut down, blanked. Only devices capable of interpreting signal had been affected. I sealed the box, wrapped it,
In foil and duct tape I wanted to bury it. Burn it.
but I couldn't. The change wasn't just in the room. It was in me. Edenwave had created something more than sound. And now I was living proof. I moved 2 weeks later, left everything, no notice, no contact. I found a one-room cabin in a signal-dead zone. No Wi-Fi, no smart devices, no electricity beyond the basics. The box came with me, still sealed. I haven't touched it since. But some mornings I wake with a low tone still humming in my bones, like a memory that didn't come from my mind. The waveforms on my skin faded, or maybe I just stopped noticing. Either way, the change feels permanent. I don't get sick anymore. My mind is quieter.
My thoughts feel organized. I never told anyone what happened. Who would believe it? I'm not interested in proving it anymore, because I understand now this wasn't meant for everyone. Somewhere along the line we stopped asking why certain
Sounds disappeared from our environments. We called it modernization. But we lost something in that silence, something older than medicine, older than language. These forks weren't instruments, they were keys. They didn't open doors. They tuned us, slowly, quietly, back to something we used to be. Something we forgot. I don't plan to share them. I don't need to. Some truths don't need broadcasting. They just need remembering. And now and then, when the air is still and the forest quiet, I'll strike one fork. Just once. And I'll listen. In that sound I hear it. Not discovery. Not revelation. Just the memory of something that was never lost. Only hidden. Waiting. It started as just a flicker. I'd been tracking orbital patterns from my backyard telescope for years. Just a hobby, something to break up the quiet. My apartment sat on the edge of the suburbs, far enough from the city lights to give me decent sky visibility, close enough that people still looked at me funny when I talked about satellites like they were old friends. That's what they were, in a way. I'd watch them cross overhead, steady and silent, plotting their movements against old star charts. But 3 months ago, something shifted. A light appeared where there hadn't been one before. Faint, barely visible, just to the left of Vega. At first I figured it was a new satellite, low orbit, maybe military. But then I noticed the rhythm. Every 88 hours it blinked, not randomly, but in sequence. Long, short, long, then silence. Then again, always the same. I recorded it, shared a short clip in one of the amateur astronomy forums. The replies were what you'd expect. Probably solar panel reflection, iridium flare, maybe a tumbling satellite. But the consistency didn't match any of those. It was precise, and most strangely, It didn't drift. Satellites move, some fast, some slowly. Even geostationary ones wobble with time. This didn't. It was fixed, like it was anchored to something I couldn't see. I logged the times, watched for weeks, and the pattern never varied. It blinked like a pulse no one else noticed. Friends joked I was obsessed. Maybe I was. But it didn't feel random. It felt deliberate. Then one night, while adjusting my scope, I realized the signal wasn't just broadcasting out into space, it was aimed, always toward the same lunar coordinate. And that's when the silence around it started to feel heavier than the flicker itself. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, just that I couldn't stop looking. Every 88 hours, like clockwork, the same signal pulsed from that static point in the sky. I started keeping detailed records, timestamps, weather, scope alignment. I picked up a cheap radio receiver to monitor other bands during those windows. Mostly static. Once or twice,
A soft pulse, hard to verify. I logged it anyway.
I kept everything offline, a spreadsheet on an old laptop, no network access, no sync. I cross-checked active satellite databases, weather anomalies, even deep-dived amateur forums and Cold War archives. Nothing lined up. Then, buried in an anitidid old manifest from 2009, I found a reference to a satellite listed as AXIT 17.5, civilian telecom license but no known telemetry or signal trail. It was launched, then forgotten. I traced the licensing company to a P.O. box in Nevada, dissolved 9 months after the launch. No personnel, no filings. It was paper thin. Curious, I plugged the last known coordinates into an open-source orbital tracker. The decay-adjusted path aligned surprisingly close to the blinking object. Still, no hard proof. Just shadows. 2 nights later, an email hit my inbox. No subject. No sender. Just one line. You're looking in the right place, but
Asking the wrong questions. My heart jumped. I hadn't posted the AX-17.5 connection.
that laptop wasn't online. I replied simply, "Who are you?" Message undeliverable. I traced the IP, routed through multiple nodes, masked beyond tracing. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the balcony, scope quiet beside me, watching. The void just left of Vega. Right on schedule, the blink returned, steady, waiting. The message didn't scare me, it focused me. I changed how I searched. Public terminals, library archives, old VPN logins I hadn't touched in years. I wasn't hiding. I was avoiding pattern recognition. If I was asking the wrong questions, maybe it wasn't what the signal was, but who it was meant for. That led me to lunar transmission history. A lot of fringe stuff, mostly abandoned projects. But in a 1993 declassified symposium transcript, I found mention of Project Telbeam, a test involving synchronized light pulses directed at the lunar surface. The note was heavily redacted, but one line stood out. Narrowband optical transmission may prove more resilient than traditional RF. The coordinates listed for the test aligned almost exactly with the signal I was tracking. I dug in too. The listed contractors. One still existed in name only, a dormant lab in New Mexico that hadn't been published in years, but still received classified federal subcontracts for optical calibration. I called their listed number 2 rings. Busy tone. I didn't try again. Later that week, a user I followed years ago on an old astronomy blog posted a simple update. An image, a timestamp, the caption, "Still blinking, still watching." Same pattern, but the timing didn't match mine. It came 11 hours earlier. That changed everything. The object wasn't broadcasting globally, it was rotating, aimed, directional. I mapped the blink angles and overlaid them with lunar survey data. The signal is aligned with Mare Tranquillitatis, triangulating to 3 repeating surface points. It wasn't just an orbit, it was a scan. A scan meant a target, and something was waiting. I didn't tell anyone, I didn't bring anyone. The third triangulation point landed near an old observatory in the Sierra Nevadas, shut down decades ago. I took vacation, packed minimally, and drove through the night. I told myself I was closing a loop. The place looked abandoned, but not neglected. The fence was intact. Windows were covered. No graffiti, no wildlife damage. But the dish out back, it hadn't fallen. It was fixed in place, angled low, pointed east, toward the horizon line of the moon. I circled the building twice, before finding a side door braced shut with a bent metal rod. Inside, the air was dry, the dust was real, but the power systems weren't. The breakers were newer, the wiring recent, taped, labeled, active. In the main chamber, the telescope had been modified, widened optics, unmarked panels. Beside it sat a makeshift station, surplus gear, mismatched monitors, and a signal scope quietly rolling waveform data. It was the blink, the same exact rhythm, but this time there was a return signal, a slight delay. Something was bouncing it back. I scrolled through the logs. It went back years, timestamps consistent with every cycle I'd tracked, all anonymized except one note entered manually. Not hours. I stood there a long time, just listening to the hum of the gear, watching the signal trace across the screen. This place wasn't abandoned, it was active, or it had been, and whatever had been receiving the signal was answering. I thought I could stay ahead of it. I was wrong. The morning after I returned, a black sedan sat across the street. No tags, engine off. It left after an hour. The next day, it was back. Different make. Same routine. I kept moving like normal, but my rhythm changed. I started scanning glass for reflections, tracking steps behind me. Always someone there, always just behind the line of deniability. I wiped my laptop, stored the observatory data on an external drive hidden beneath the spare tire in my trunk. I didn't know if I was protecting evidence or just myself. The more I studied the signal, the clearer it became. It wasn't originating from Earth, it was responding to it. The object near the moon wasn't emitting, it was acknowledging. The blink wasn't a broadcast, it was a handshake. I wrote a report, timestamp logs, orbital overlays, stills from the observatory system. 3 recipients, a physics professor I trusted, an old systems analyst, and a journalist I'd spoken to once at a conference. I never sent it. That night, my apartment lock was damaged. Nothing stolen, just disturbed. The next morning, my email was locked out, account flagged for suspicious activity, drafts erased, recovery info gone. I tried setting up a new address. The page froze mid-keystroke before I finished typing my name. I stared at the screen. I hadn't even pressed send, but someone already knew. I returned to the observatory once more. It felt inevitable. The drive was quiet. No music, no headlights, just that pressure in my chest, like something behind me was gaining ground. When I arrived, everything was gone. Telescope dismantled, equipment stripped, the floor scorched where the signal monitor had stood. But the power was still on. In a side room I hadn't noticed before, I found a locked cabinet. I pried it open with a tire iron. Inside were 2 static-wrapped hard drives and an envelope. The note inside was plain, typed, no name, just, "You're not the first. Don't be the last. Protect the signal." I took the drives and left. Rented a room under a false name. Hooked the first drive to an offline machine. The files were raw surveillance, time-stamped video, month after month, showing a thin, needle-like object orbiting just above the lunar terminator line. Barely visible except when light glanced off its surface, but the blink, it was still there. Exact same sequence. Then one file, dated 9 days before I found the place, showed something new, a flare. The light held steady for 13 seconds, then silence. The signal never returned. I checked my own logs. They matched. That blink we'd tracked for years, it stopped that day. The final file wasn't a video. It was a composite, stitched from high-altitude IR passes. It showed the
structure in full. It wasn't rotating for orbit stabilization. It was scanning, mapping arcs, matching surface grids. It had passed over every major landmass on Earth once,
then shut down. It didn't malfunction, it was confirmation. It's been 5 weeks since the signal ended, 5 weeks since I watched that flare and realized it was never just a transmission, it was an answer. I haven't looked through my telescope since. I can't. Whatever that thing was, it finished its task and it left. I don't know if it's still up there. I'm not sure I'd want to see it if it was. Sleep's gotten strange. Shallow, thin. I wake up remembering shapes that don't make sense. Silent water, cold beams of light, a rhythm that shouldn't have sound but does. Sometimes I see things that don't feel wrong, just misplaced.
Lights in buildings that should be empty. People showing up twice in places they shouldn't. I don't think I'm paranoid. I think something was watching. And maybe it still is. I never released the drives. I archived them in 2 different
places, sent sealed copies to people I trust to wait for the right moment, if that moment ever comes. The message in the envelope, "Protect the signal," used to sound like a threat. Now I think it was a resignation. The blink wasn't ours to explain. We were just observers. The moment passed, and something far beyond us moved on. I keep changing locations, new towns, new names, not because I'm hiding, because the world I lived in before doesn't feel real anymore. I used to think I was studying the sky, but now I know I was being studied. And whatever was up there, it saw what it needed. Then it went quiet. That should bring comfort. It doesn't. I started at Vitalis Labs 2 years ago. Back then, we were a handful of overworked idealists in a rented industrial unit near the freeway, most of us surviving on caffeine, biotech degrees, and a vague belief we were changing the world. I was brought in to handle logistics, inventory, supply lines, anything to keep the experimental lab stocked with organic substrates and clean rooms humming. Our big pitch was bold, a 3D bioprinter that could grow functional human organs from scratch. No donors, no rejections, just print and transplant. and for a while it looked like it might actually work. We started with simple tissues, cartilage, then liver samples. We called the machine Tyrus, after the ancient Greek word for form. Sleek, coffin-sized and mostly silent, it stood at the center of the lab like a sleeping animal. The first time I saw it run, I watched through the glass window as fine nozzles layered strands of engineered collagen with living cells suspended in a nutrient gel. It was beautiful, in a clinical, unsettling kind of way. But then, in early February, we noticed something strange, barely noticeable at first. One of the printed liver samples had a structure that wasn't in the blueprint, a tiny vein cluster in a spiral shape, like a fern coiled in reverse. The tech team brushed. It offers a harmless deviation, maybe a sensor glitch, but the print logs were clean. I flagged it, documented the anomaly and moved on. A week later it happened again, this time in a kidney prototype. Different organ, same spiral. We ran diagnostics on Tyrus. Nothing came up. No errors, no hardware, drift. The model files hadn't been altered either. Still, Dr. Emery, our co-founder and chief designer, laughed it off. "Biology's messy," he said. "Things wander." I nodded, but something about the way he avoided my eye stuck with me. We weren't supposed to be printing improvisations. Every structure was mapped, every cell accounted for. Tyrus wasn't, designed to improvise. And yet, the spirals kept showing up. I waited until the lab cleared out one night before digging into the internal logs. Officially, my role didn't extend to systems access, but I'd picked up enough from our IT guy, Leo, to navigate the back end when I needed to. Tyrus ran on a secure closed system, air-gapped from external networks, its code base partitioned into encrypted modules. Every design file was logged with timestamps, version history, even keystroke trails. I started by pulling the schematics for the two organs that had shown the spiral deviations. The design files looked untouched, perfect matches to their blueprints. But when I opened the compiled instructions fed to the printer, there it was again, the spiral. It wasn't in the source model, but it appeared in the compiled version, the machine-readable code that Tyrus actually followed, which meant something was rewriting the output between file submission and execution. I exported a segment and ran it through a line-by-line comparison tool. The edits were subtle, buried deep in coordinate layers most people wouldn't notice. Same file sizes, same checksums, but different paths. I checked who compiled the final prints. The user tag said admin.local, no name, no account trail. The compiler logs had been scrubbed, not deleted, scrubbed, overwritten with synthetic noise that mimicked system operations. This wasn't a bug. Someone, or something, was intentionally masking changes. I sent Leo a message under the pretense of a formatting issue and asked if he could pull deeper logs from the root system. He didn't reply that night, but the next morning he handed me a thumb drive without a word. "Don't open it on the lab network," he said, eyes flat. I waited until I was home to plug it in. The files were screen recordings, 10 in total, each capturing the Tyrus OS during overnight cycles. I watched them one by one. Around 2:18 a.m. during idle hours, the command console lit up on its own. No user input, no scheduled task. The terminal flashed a sequence of raw text, long strings of characters that weren't code, weren't commands, just data. Strings like NSYN27B and flesh. Residue, grow, repeat. Then, at the end of each cycle, a new print instruction was compiled, always with a spiral embedded in the geometry. I didn't sleep that night. Something had access to our system. It wasn't trying to hide. It was showing us its process, like a message left out in plain view. But I didn't know who the message was for, or if we were even the ones meant to see it. For the next few days, I acted like nothing was wrong. Routine helped me blend in inventory checks, delivery logs, printer calibrations. But underneath, I was sorting through everything: timestamps, edits, machine behavior, staff schedules. Something didn't add up, and the deeper I looked, the less this felt like a programming issue. I focused on the spiral, its shape, its recurrence. It was always identical, always positioned in non-critical regions of the printed organs, just
Out of the way, almost like a watermark.
I reached out to an old friend from university who'd gone into computational biology. I sent him the shape under the guise of studying natural growth formations. He called me the next evening, voice low. "Where'd you find this?" he asked. I told him it was from an unrelated research project. He didn't buy it. "It's not a natural spiral," he said. "It's too perfect. It follows a modified Fibonacci ratio, but not one that occurs in nature. It's a closed-loop algorithm, not a growth pattern. Someone designed this." That night, I dug into the firmware logs, something I hadn't touched before. Tyrus had a backup system, a kind of error correction protocol that stored core files for emergency rollbacks. Buried in one of the compressed archives was an older version of the compiler. I decrypted it and found a changelog with a single unusual entry, dated 11 months ago. Integrated recursive pattern seed, silent mode, test stable. The change had been marked as internal testing with no author signature and flagged as do not remove. I checked our company update logs. There was no record of any such modification. Whoever added it bypassed our version control. That's when I remembered something Dr. Emery's sabbatical last year. He'd taken 2 weeks off without explanation, said he needed to reset his perspective. It happened exactly 11 months ago. I pulled archived emails, internal memos, anything I could find from that period. He hadn't gone anywhere, at least not according to his calendar. But buried in a folder labelled Pre-Clinical Outreach, I found a scanned receipt for a week-long stay at a private research retreat in rural Alberta. No mention of what was done there. Just the name of the facility, Helix Biointegration. I searched the name online. Nothing. No website. No registration. Just one result, an old conference pamphlet listing Helix as a closed consultancy specializing in post-organic design structures. That phrase stuck with me. Post-organic. Like something that wasn't meant to evolve from nature, something that was meant to be grown another way. The Helix Trail led nowhere official, but it was enough to justify a trip. I told the team I was taking personal time and flew into Calgary under a different name. Rented a car, drove north past the marked towns and cell towers until the road turned to gravel and then to dirt. It took hours, but eventually I found it. A squat concrete building half sunk into the slope of a hill. No signs, no mailbox, no gate. just a rusted security camera mounted above a blank steel door. I sat in the car for nearly 10 minutes, engine
off, staring at the structure. It didn't look abandoned, but it didn't look active either.
I walked the perimeter, found no windows, just ventilation slits and what looked like sensor mounts buried in the brush. The door was locked, but not alarmed. I picked it, clumsily, nervously, with a toolkit I didn't know I'd be brave enough to use. Inside it smelled like dust and solvent. The lights flickered when I found the wall panel. It was colder than outside, the air processed and dry. The first room was a lobby, stripped bare, except for a mounted map, showing 4 zones labelled with letters, A through D. The paper was yellowed, corners curled. I moved cautiously, floor creaking under my steps. Zone A had been a lab, glass walls, overturned stools, fragments of tubing and broken petri dishes still scattered across the floor. Someone had left in a hurry. In Zone B, I found refrigeration, units all dark now. Most had been emptied, but one drawer jammed halfway open revealed a sealed bio bag containing a mass of tissue. It looked like muscle, but with tiny branching structures across its surface, structures shaped like the spiral. It was preserved perfectly, no sign of decay. Zone C had workstations, still powered. One monitor flickered to life when I brushed, the mouse. It was running a simulation, dozens of organic shapes growing across a digital grid, mutating slowly over time. Every so often a design would lock into a configuration and get labelled valid. When I checked the parameters, I froze. The printer specs matched Tyrus exactly. Same nozzle type, same gel substrates. The final compiled instructions were being transmitted somewhere. An outgoing sync pointing to a masked IP with a destination, hash labelled VTL-1. That was our lab. This place had been sending Tyrus designs. We hadn't built the spiral. We'd received it. I left with a hard drive and 3 printed pages I found near the server rack. One of them was a list of names most crossed out. Near the bottom, my name had been added in clean, untrembling ink. Back at the lab, everything felt sharper, louder, like the world had dialed up a few notches while I was away. Conversations felt rehearsed. Dr. Emery looked up from his desk a little too quickly when I walked in. I told him I needed to recalibrate. The printer, claiming the last few prints had slight inconsistencies. He nodded, distracted, and returned to his screen. I could tell he wasn't really listening. I spent the next 2 days isolated in the machine room with Tyrus, pretending to monitor its function, when in reality I was building a separate log, a clean, offline record of everything it had printed in the past month. What I found confirmed what I already feared. New designs had appeared, entirely novel organ structures not based on human anatomy. Lattices of fibre and vascular scaffolds that didn't correspond to any known biology. They weren't organs meant for people. They were something else. The labelling system had changed too. Instead of liver V2 or kidney dev, the files now carried titles like phase seed 9 and shell MK3. It was subtle, like the system itself had quietly stopped pretending. One night I compiled everything I had. Photos from Halex, the simulation files, the altered compiler code, a few anonymized images of the printed structures. I encrypted the data and sent it to 3 people I trusted from outside the company: a systems engineer I once worked with, a journalist I knew from college, and a bioethics professor who'd spoken out publicly about the risks of unchecked synthetic biology. I didn't hear back from any of them, not a single reply. The following morning, Leo, the IT guy, didn't show up for work. Dr. Emery said he'd taken a leave of absence, but there was no warning, no handoff of credentials, just an empty chair and a white terminal. That night, I found a thin envelope on my windshield. No return address, just a typed message inside. Stop compiling external logs. Final warning. I looked up immediately, scanned the street. No one. Just the sound of wind and the low hum of a distant car. I didn't sleep that night. I moved my laptop to a Faraday bag, stripped metadata from every file I'd saved. I stopped using my phone, paid for everything in cash, but I knew it wasn't enough. Someone had been watching for weeks, maybe since the first spiral appeared, maybe since before that. The printer wasn't just running unauthorized code, it had become something else, and the people behind it weren't trying to fix it, they were protecting it. I broke into the lab on a Sunday. Just after 3 a.m. I'd memorized the staff schedules and knew the cleaning crew didn't arrive until 5. Tyrus sat idle in the center of the room, silent but awake, the standby light pulsing slowly like a breath. I bypassed the external control console and jacked directly into the hardware interface with a cloned access key I'd been working on for days. It gave me one window, maybe 10 minutes, before the system flagged it as tampered. I wasn't after the printer logs this time. I was after the seed file, the one I'd seen referenced again and again, the one marked origin.locked. It took 6 minutes to extract. It wasn't code in the usual sense. It was layered geometry, recursive growth patterns embedded in a matrix of simulated biological constraints. When unfolded visually, it resembled not an organ but an entire structure. Ribbed walls, a central chamber, branching canals. At first I thought it was a schematic for a synthetic organism, but the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. It was architecture. Tyrus had been printing pieces of something larger, fragments designed to grow, self-assemble, and adapt to environmental conditions. Not machines, not life, a hybrid, something in between. I followed the oldest internal print log, a test marked Phase Seed 1, which had been designated as a failed experiment. It wasn't in storage. According to the logs, it had been transferred off-site for disposal. But I traced the movement tags and found a location, our secondary testing facility, decommissioned over a year ago after a minor fire. I drove there that afternoon. The building looked dead, overgrown, but the security system had been reactivated. Inside I found something that didn't belong. Rows of containment units powered by an isolated generator. In the far chamber, beneath a dirty plastic tarp, I found the original print. It wasn't small, about the size of a dog, but wrong in every way. No symmetry, no defined surface. The spiral was there, etched along what looked like a spinal ridge. I moved closer. It was warm. Not just recently, actively. And then I saw it shift, not a movement, but a contraction, like it was breathing. I backed away and left. I drove until sunset, pulled over at a rest stop, and vomited in the parking lot. When I got back home, there was no internet. My phone wouldn't turn on. My apartment had been searched. Nothing missing, just rearranged, subtly wrong. Drawers closed too tightly. Laptop charger placed too neatly on the table. I didn't report it. Who would I report it to? I didn't go back to the lab. I resigned. Over email using a pre-written message I'd stored weeks earlier. No response came. No questions. I was simply removed. The company website erased my name within hours. It was as if I had never worked there, as if I had never existed at all. It's been 9 months since I left Vitalis. I've changed names twice, switched cities 3 times. I rent rooms under fake IDs, pay cash, keep off public networks. Every now and then I check the news, hoping to see some trace of it, a recall, a leak, a whistleblower braver than me. But there's never anything. Just patents filed under shell companies, medical conferences celebrating advances in regenerative tissue. I saw Emery once, from across the street in San Diego. He was walking with 2 men in dark suits, smiling, relaxed. He looked like someone who'd won, not someone carrying a secret. That night, I dreamed about the print. Not the ones we made in the lab, but the larger structure, the one implied by all the fragments. In the dream, I was inside it. The walls were soft, pulsing, alive. I wasn't afraid. I was calm. That's the part I can't shake. This feeling that whatever we uncovered wasn't malevolent. It was indifferent, unconcerned with us in the same way we are unconcerned with the bacteria in our lungs. It had no message, no morality. It only had design, and we invited it in. It started with a printer, but it never needed us to finish the job. We were just the ignition point. I've since gone back through the hard drive, frame by frame, searching for something I missed, some overlooked line, some sign I can use to stop it. But the more I study it, the more I understand. It isn't about stopping anything, it's about witnessing. Every piece printed, every spiral embedded in tissue is part of a whole, something larger that's growing across labs and facilities we'll never hear about.
I don't think Emery designed the seed. I think he was shown it. Or maybe it was simply time for it to appear. That's what haunts me. Not the fear of what it is, but the possibility that this isn't new at all, that it's happened before.
That this is how intelligence re-enters biology, not through machines, not through code, but through growth, through pattern, through quiet, unnoticed replication.
I sometimes think about going public, recording this story, sending it to people who still believe in accountability. But then I remember Leo and the empty look in his eyes before he disappeared. I remember the warmth of that print, how it breathed,
like something asleep and dreaming. And I remember the shape, the spiral, curling inward, always returning to itself. That's the part I can't unsee. That's the part that follows me. I haven't touched a printer since. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I swear I can still hear it. A low hum, steady, patient, waiting for the next file to compile.